So welcome everybody who might be here joining us today for another Women in THR Coffee Chat webinar. And today we have the lovely Amanda Wheeler, who is president of the American Vapor Manufacturers Association. So my name is Jess Perkins, and I represent a platform called tobaccoharmreduction.net, and it's this platform who is hosting the webinar today. So Amanda, why don't I pass the mic over to you and you can introduce yourself and talk a bit about your background and how you got into the THR world.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jessica, and thank you for the invitation and having me on. So my name is Amanda Wheeler. I am the president of the American Vapor Manufacturers Association. Shar Owen and myself co-founded the association back in 2019 after we had helped several hundred companies with resources to apply with pre-market tobacco applications with the FDA. A lot of the smaller and independent businesses in the United States didn't really have any help or assistance or guidance in working with the FDA. And so we stepped into that role to help people who otherwise wouldn't have the resources to do that. And then after we had that experience of helping those companies with their applications, we formed an association to fight for their businesses, to fight for their rights in Congress and with the FDA on the federal level here in the United States. In addition to that, I also own a vapor business. My husband and I started it in 2011, and it's called J-Vapes. We have 6 retail locations. We also manufacture e-liquid here. And so, you know, our experience as smokers who use the product really propelled us into starting our business. And that experience of running a business really propelled me into advocacy.
Did you personally use vaping and flavors as a way of cutting down or quitting on smoking? So was that a transition that you personally made?
Oh yeah, absolutely it was. You know, like most people who smoke, I started at a very young age when I was in high school, you know, wanted to be sort of rebellious and cool and, you know, smoking cigarettes. And, you know, pretty soon that developed into a years-long habit. When I was 19, I had Hodgkin's lymphoma, and despite going through chemotherapy and radiation for the better part of a year, I still smoked for 10 years after my cancer, just because I couldn't quit. You know, cancer didn't scare me into being able to quit. I needed a tool that was going to be effective, and vaping was the first thing I ever tried that was actually effective. It took me about 4 weeks to quit. My husband quit smoking with vaping in about a weekend. It took me a little longer, about 4 weeks, but I have had no desire to smoke since. I found it to be very effective. Flavors were a key component for me when I first started vaping. I vaped a butterscotch flavor. I vaped like a fruity pear blend flavor. And so for me, it was very important and very helpful.
So in terms of using flavors to move away from smoking, did you find that you went for the very different flavors to tobacco? Because some people kind of need tobacco-y type flavors because it's otherwise it's too different from smoking. Or did you go straight for something completely different? Was it a...
Yeah, well, so when I first started, it was the butterscotch flavor, which was a butterscotch tobacco flavor. So it was sort of a flavored tobacco. And, you know, I used that probably for about the first month. And then what really kept vaping sort of interesting and novel to me was being able to experiment and try a different wide variety of flavors, because there were just so many different interesting things that were available to help people. You know, you could try a fruity flavor, a dessert flavor, all sorts of things. And so for me, having a variety of things I cycle through has always been what's been helpful. Because, you know, after a while, you start to lose the taste of the flavor after a few weeks. And so being able to switch between things, I've always found to be very helpful.
Yeah. Are you currently a vapor? And if so, what are your current favorite flavors?
So yeah, I am still a vapor, very proud vapor. It's been very, very helpful to me. I've stuck with it over the years. Right now I am vaping in one device, a churro flavor, and in another device, a strawberry kiwi flavor.
Wow, I didn't know you could get churro flavored vapes.
Yeah, well, it's one of the flavors my company manufactures, and it's one of my favorites.
Okay, yeah, I've seen your company manufacture a lot of different flavors and the really funky names that you have as well. Really interesting website.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, really interesting products. Great, so let's move on to the topic of the recent FDA situation with Juul. Are you okay to talk about this?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, cool. So in June, the FDA had ordered all Juul products off the market in a marketing denial order, or an MDO. So in its denial of Juul's application, the FDA says it lacked sufficient evidence regarding the toxicological profile of the products to demonstrate that marketing of the products would be appropriate for the protection of the public health. However, since then, the FDA has backed down from its decision to order all Juul products off the market that puts the previous order on hold. So the agency announced on Twitter it has determined that there are scientific issues unique to the Juul application that warrant additional review. So a question I have for you, Amanda, is do you think the FDA is making a mockery of the claim it's evaluating science in the best interests of public health?
Your question is an excellent way to frame the issue. It is making a mockery of that scientific review process. Our association, American Vapor Manufacturers, we actually just put in a request to the Office of the Inspector General to open an inquiry into the political bias in FDA's decision-making rather than basing it on science. There's clear evidence that there's a lot of political motivation around what they did, not only on the Juul application, but this has happened to millions of other products in the United States that the media isn't talking about. This is this regulatory arson from the FDA has been going on in the US for over a year and a half now. It's very politically motivated. There's a lot of documentation and things that's come up in litigation that's been well established. And so, you know, the silver lining to what went on with Juul is I think a lot of the public here in the United States actually started to pay attention to this mockery of a process that FDA has going on, and especially FDA coming out and immediately backtracking the next day. I think it really showed that they're lacking in some credibility, that it's not truly a science-driven process, because they spent 2 years looking at Juul's application, and yet in about 24 hours, they sort of said, oh, there are these 6,000 pages that we never read. Well, they had the application for 2 years and it only took them 24 hours to figure out there were these 6,000 pages that they never saw before. So I think that says a lot about the rigor or lack thereof in their process right now.
Yeah, we couldn't agree more. And the FDA's track record in terms of their decision making regarding Juul products actually seems to create a policy environment where the most dangerous nicotine products are legal and available, while selling one of the safest and most effective products and for reducing smoking could be potentially criminalized. And again, that just seems crazy.
You know, it is crazy. I mean, Juul is a product that has been the front runner here in the United States. It has converted more smokers to vaping than any other single product. You know, despite any other concerns that folks may have about Juul, that fact is undeniable. And so we are creating a situation where you're taking the most widely used, the most popular products on the market, you're criminalizing them. Not only that, they're taking all of the products that are, you know, coming out of these local mom and pop businesses and criminalizing those. So, you know, people aren't able to get the mass market products in the convenience store. People aren't able to get the craft specialty products in their local retailers. And so it's just, if the FDA continues down this path, we are quickly heading towards a situation in the United States where the only products that are going to be available are these sort of backroom, under-the-counter products that are coming in from overseas that aren't worried about FDA's process. And so it's very concerning.
And also smokers may be tempted to go back to smoking and just stick to cigarettes.
Absolutely. I mean, there are a large proportion of people, they're not going to want to go to gray market questionable products. They're going to return to what they know. And there's already a misinformation epidemic in America where more than 3/4 of our population here thinks that vaping is as bad or worse than cigarettes. Even among people who vape, there are a lot of people that believe that. And so I think that misinformation combined with products not being available, people will go back to smoking because they're not going to see it as a worse alternative because they've been so misinformed.
I think you raise a really important point about misinformation. What do you think could be the single largest, most effective thing that we as advocates could do to correct misinformation? And do you think it's a very long-term ride?
You know, I think at this point it may be a longer term ride because for years, people here in the States have been handcuffed. We are prevented by law from telling the truth about these products as business advocates, right? Consumer advocates are free to say those sorts of things, but as business owners, we're not allowed to make those kinds of claims when we're talking with our customers. And so they can't get that accurate information from us. And the information that's come out of places like the Food and Drug Administration, the Centers for Disease Control, the public health, public education campaigns, it's all been about heavy metals and stroke risk and completely fabricated things based on junk science. And hundreds of millions of dollars have been poured into the effort of pumping out that false information for years now. And I do think that that's something that has to be combated with a very serious, very coordinated public education campaign from the other side that tells the truth about the products. But it's hard because that's not something that can come from the industry. That has to come from our public health authorities, right? And we're starting to see a change with certain public health experts, former tobacco control experts that are speaking out. They see the truth about vaping products. They're starting to talk about harm reduction, but we still have a long way to go. And it's going to require as serious and as well-funded of a campaign as was spent on the misinformation campaign.
Yeah, I think you made that point really well. That was a really thorough answer. That probably leads quite well on to my next question, which is a higher level, more US market-based question. So what do you think will be the largest obstacle in the US specifically regarding the acceptance of the alternative nicotine delivery systems market?
I think what is the hardest is difficult because there are several hard things, right? There are the regulatory challenges, which we've talked about. I think probably the hardest thing right now is the media attitudes, the reporting that gets done on this topic. Public opinion, I think, is probably the most difficult challenge because that is the hardest one to resolve.
I think you're right. It's how do you change public opinion, and that's going to take a long time, and it's a whole multitude of things, and it's very complex. But I think you've covered a lot of those points really well. And so should we move on to the topic of flavors specifically? So we know that flavors have and do play a very important role in different product categories. For example, in the food industry, low-fat diet products have added flavors to help people to switch to healthier diets to lose weight, and we know how effective that is. And in 2020, the FDA actually banned all flavors except tobacco and menthol for cartridge-based e-cigarettes such as Juul. And I was scrolling through your Twitter page recently and noticed that you tweeted about flavors in tobacco harm reduction and in response to that FDA decision. So you tweeted, so tobacco is not a flavor that is natural to vaping products. It is frankly silly to say that the only flavor that can be added to a vape product is the flavor of the most deadly consumer product in history. So what role do you think flavors can further play in smokers switching from cigarettes to vaping in an attempt to quit smoking?
Flavors have a vitally important role to play. They break that connection that smokers have with tobacco. One of the hardest things about quitting smoking, not only is the nicotine craving, but also the ritual of smoking, right? And I think one of the reasons why vaping is so successful is because it helps people recreate that ritual of that hand to mouth motion. Those times of day when people really enjoyed a cigarette, they can enjoy a vape now. But flavors take it a step further because flavors offer a very appealing alternative to the taste and smell of tobacco, which certainly I've never met a smoker that said, I smoke I love the way that it smells, right? That is not a common thing that I hear from people. Most people, when they start vaping, they're so relieved by using something that tastes good and smells good and offers them variety and choices and doesn't remind them of having that smoke clinging to their hair and their clothes. And so for me, it's something I see as crucially important. I think the research bears that out. There's a huge body of evidence that shows how effective flavors are, and even in addition to the research, you can see that in what consumer decisions they're actually making at the point of purchase, right? We've got over 3/4 of adults who primarily use flavors other than tobacco. And so you see right there, given a free choice of what works for consumers, that is what most of them are choosing.
Yeah, and I think you raise an important point about it's really essential to allow people to have that vast array of choice of flavors rather than restricting flavors. It's about giving them, a full suite of choice. So if I'm a consumer, for example, and I want to go and buy, an e-liquid, buy a flavor, how can I be confident that the flavor is good in quality, that it's not going to have any harmful substances, that it's got the stamp of quality on it? What would I look out for as a consumer?
Yeah, absolutely. I think domestically produced e-liquids here in the United States that comply with ISO standards, that are produced in ISO certified laboratories. I think it's really important to use known and trusted manufacturers when you're making selections of products. Here in the US, it's a bit of a complicated situation right now because to be on the market legally, flavors have to be going through a PMTA process. So that's another thing that people could look for, even though that is a very flawed and problematic situation at the moment.
Sure. Well, thank you very much for answering those questions so elegantly regarding flavours and so thoroughly. I have a question actually about tobacco harm reduction individuals or organisations. Is there anybody in particular in this space that you admire or follow that you would recommend for other people who want to follow somebody who's making waves or big moves in this space?
Well, how long do we have? There are so many. One of the reasons why I love being in this tobacco harm reduction fight is there are so many people that I admire, and I'm so grateful that I get the opportunity to work with on a regular basis. I would say Clive Bates is a wonderful person for anybody to follow. I think he's doing amazing work around, not only calling out the junk science, but really pointing out a lot of the lunacy that's going on at the FDA. Mark Gunther is somebody who within the last couple of years has been a really interesting person to follow. Mark Gunther reports on philanthropy, and he's really taken a keen interest in how Bloomberg Philanthropies has influenced WHO's attitude towards harm reduction, how it's influenced various governments around the world, in addition to here in the United States, what Bloomberg Philanthropies, the destruction they've done with their allies. So he's an amazing person to follow. I would always suggest following Alex Norcia with Filter Magazine. He's got great reporting on everything that's happening to stay informed and stay up to date. There are so many wonderful advocates. I would say Nancy Lucas is someone recently that I've come to have a lot of appreciation for the work that she does in the Asia Pacific region. It's very motivating for me because I get down and out about the stuff that's going on here in the United States. And then I see some of the things that they're dealing with in Asia and how they've been able to reverse some of those policies. And to me, it's very motivating when I get sort of depressed about what's happening here. God, there are so many. Lindsay Stroud, I think, is an excellent person to follow. I'm biased because she's a board member with me in our organization, but she is so smart on policy and calling all of these things out, and so good with the data side of harm reduction and harm reduction by the numbers. I would recommend anybody follow Lindsay. Too many others to count. Those are the ones off the top of my head that I really look to. Michelle Minton does amazing work. Tim Andrews over at Americans for Tax Reform. Guy Bentley with the Reason Foundation. There is no lack of advocates. Skip Murray, who has gone from being just a consumer advocate to now becoming a professional advocate with her career. She does wonderful research and pulls together resources for people, and as well as she has a really valuable voice on people struggling with mental health and some of the benefits she's experienced from nicotine with some of her mental health struggles. I think she's an important voice in the conversation. So just so many amazing people to follow, and you know, we all sort of play off of each other's work and keep each other motivated, and it's really a lovely community to be a part of.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really great list of people to start with. And I'm actually chatting with Michelle Minton on a webinar next week, because I had lunch with her at the recent GFN, and she is a fabulous woman. And we had a great conversation about the benefits of nicotine and her work and her writing work that she's been doing. So we can definitely learn more about Michelle next week. So thank you for that list. And finally, before we let you leave, Amanda, are there any words of wisdom or advice for any women or men who want to get into the THR space, maybe just need the confidence, any advice at all that you can give? Final words.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I think I have a reputation for being a very confident person in this space. You know, I think generally I'm regarded as someone who's, you know, fairly well spoken and, you know, that writes well and presents the issues well. And it's funny that people have that perception about me, because I'm deeply nervous every time I do any of these things. But I have found over the years that I can be confident in my expertise on the subject, right? I may be nervous about public speaking, but I know that I know more about this usually than most of the people that I'm talking to. I have over a decade of lived experience with it. And so, you know, I tend to lean on that when I'm concerned about these things. I've always tried to rise to every challenge, whether that be, you know, public speaking or giving testimony in some kind of committee, or you know, meeting with someone that has a lot of importance in politics or whatever. I've learned not to ever let myself be intimidated just by leaning on the knowledge that I have. And so to anybody that wants to get involved in advocacy, I would just say, make sure that you're spending time doing your research, because when you have a mastery of the facts, at that point, it's just about getting that information out there. And so, you know, do your research, you know, rely on what you know to be true, your lived experience, and go out there with all of the confidence based on what you know to be true.
Yeah, I think they're very wise words, and we can all use a taste of all of those, I think. And you don't come across as nervous. You come across very eloquently and very well. So yeah, like you said, trust in your knowledge and your expertise, and just communicate what you know. So I think that's true. Anyone have any questions from the audience at all? We have a few people on the call. Raise your hand or put it in the Q&A. And if not, then we will end